The sound of hooves echoed through the canyon as Harrison Zane rode toward his ranch, bone-weary from 3 weeks on the cattle trail. When he heard a voice so pure it stopped him cold in the New Mexico twilight of 1878. He pulled his horse to a halt just beyond the stable yard, listening to the melody that floated through the evening air like something from a dream he had forgotten. The woman's voice rose and fell with a gentleness that seemed impossible in this harsh land, singing a song he did not recognize but felt in his very bones. Harrison dismounted quietly, leading his mare around the side of the weathered barn, and there she stood among his horses, a slender figure in a dusty traveling dress with her dark hair falling loose from its pins as she reached out to stroke the nose of his most temperamental stallion. The black horse, which would bite anyone who came near, stood perfectly still under her touch, his eyes half closed as if in a trance. Harrison watched from the shadows as the woman continued her song, moving between the horses with a grace that seemed out of place in the rough corral. She sang in a language he did not fully understand, though he caught Spanish words mixed with something else, something older. The horses gathered around her like children around their mother, and Harrison felt something shift in his chest, a loneliness he had carried for so long he had stopped noticing its weight. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dry earth, and the woman spun around with a gasp. Her eyes were wide and dark in the fading light, her hand flying to her throat. "I am sorry," she said quickly, her accent marking her as someone who had learned English as a second tongue. "I did not mean to trespass. I was traveling through and heard the horses calling, and I thought perhaps they needed water or were frightened." Harrison removed his hat, suddenly aware of how rough he must look after weeks on the trail. "They do not call," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Least not in any way I have ever heard." The woman's face flushed, visible even in the dimming light. "I know it sounds foolish, but I have always been able to hear when animals are distressed. Your horses, they seemed lonely, so I sang to them." "They were calm enough when I left," Harrison said, moving closer, "but I have never seen them like this, especially that one." He gestured to the black stallion. "He broke a man's arm last month." The woman looked back at the horse, reaching out to touch his muzzle again. "He is not mean. He is afraid. Someone hurt him badly when he was young." Harrison stared at her, wondering how she could possibly know that. He had won the stallion in a card game from a ranch hand who admitted to beating the animal regularly. "What is your name?" he asked. "Helena Garrett," she replied, turning back to face him. The last rays of sunlight caught in her hair, turning it copper at the edges. "I am traveling to Sloan to find work. My wagon lost a wheel about 2 miles back, and it will be morning before the wheelwright can fix it. I saw your ranch and thought perhaps I could ask for water and a place to rest for the night, but when I arrived, no one was here except the horses." "I have been away," Harrison said, feeling awkward in a way he had not felt since he was a boy. "The ranch hands are likely in town. It is Saturday and they take their pay and spend it on whiskey and cards." He paused, making a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. "You are welcome to stay. I have a guest room in the house. It is not much, but it is clean and has a proper bed." Helena hesitated, her hand still resting on the stallion's neck. "I do not wish to impose or cause you any trouble. A woman alone, staying in a man's house, people will talk." "Let them," Harrison said, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "Anyone who would leave a woman stranded out here in the dark is not worth concerning yourself with. Besides, Sloan is 5 miles from here. No one will know unless you tell them." She smiled then, a small tentative thing that made her whole face change. "Thank you. I am grateful for your kindness, Mr. Zane, Harrison Zane, but you can call me Harrison." Then you must call me Helena." He led her to the house, a modest adobe structure that had belonged to his father and his father's father before that. Inside, he lit the oil lamps and showed her to the guest room, which held a simple bed with a patchwork quilt his mother had made before she died. Helena set down her small traveling bag and turned to him with that same gentle smile. "It is perfect," she said. "Thank you again." Harrison found himself unable to look away from her face, from the kindness in her eyes that seemed to reach something deep inside him that had been closed off for years. "I will make us some supper," he said finally. "Nothing fancy, but I have beans and salt pork, and I can make coffee that will not poison you." She laughed, a sound like water over stones. "That sounds wonderful. Let me help you." They worked together in the small kitchen, and Harrison found himself talking more than he had in months. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle drives that took him away for weeks at a time, about the loneliness of this land that could break a person if they let it. Helena listened with an attention that made him feel like his words mattered. And when she spoke of her own life, he heard the pain beneath her careful words. She had been married young, she told him, to a man her father had chosen. They had lived in Santa Fe, where her husband had worked as a merchant. But he had died 6 months ago in a shooting outside a saloon, killed by a drunk who mistook him for someone else. The man had left her with debts and no means to support herself, and her father had died years before, so she had decided to start fresh in Sloan, where she had heard a family needed a governess for their children. "I am sorry," Harrison said, the words feeling inadequate. "That is a hard thing to carry." Helena's eyes glistened in the lamplight, but she did not cry. "He was not a kind man," she said quietly. "My father arranged the marriage because he thought it would give me security, but my husband, he drank heavily and had a terrible temper. I mourned his death as any Christian woman should, but I cannot pretend I mourned the loss of him, if you understand my meaning." Harrison understood perfectly. He had seen too many women trapped in marriages that slowly killed their spirits. "You are brave to start over alone." "I am terrified," she admitted, meeting his eyes across the rough wooden table. "But I am also free for the first time in my life, and I will not waste that freedom by being a coward." They ate their simple meal and talked long into the night, and Harrison felt something stirring in his heart that he had thought dead. When Helena finally retired to the guest room, pleading exhaustion from her journey, he sat alone in the main room and listened to the silence of the house. But it was a different silence now, warmer somehow, less empty. He woke before dawn, as was his habit, and went out to tend the horses. To his surprise, Helena was already in the corral, singing softly to the animals as they gathered around her in the pale morning light. She wore the same traveling dress, now even dustier than before, but she moved with such grace that Harrison found himself simply watching, mesmerized by the way she touched each horse as if greeting an old friend. "You are up early," he called out, and she turned with a smile that made the sunrise seem dim by comparison. "I have always been an early riser," she said, "and I wanted to say goodbye to them before I left. The wheelwright should be at my wagon by now." The reminder that she was leaving hit Harrison harder than it should have. He had known her less than a day, but the thought of the ranch returning to its usual emptiness made his chest tighten. "Let me hitch up my wagon and drive you into Sloan," he offered. "It is the least I can do." They rode together through the awakening landscape, the New Mexico morning painting the mesas and arroyos in shades of gold and rose. Helena sat beside him on the wagon seat, and they talked easily, as if they had known each other for years rather than hours. Harrison found himself telling her things he had never spoken aloud, about the dreams he had once had of raising horses instead of cattle, of breeding animals known for their intelligence and gentle temperament, rather than just their ability to survive the harsh conditions. "That is a beautiful dream," Helena said, her voice soft with genuine interest. "Why did you not pursue it?" "Cattle pay better," Harrison said with a shrug. "And when my father died, the ranch needed money more than it needed dreams. But sometimes, when I am out on the trail and see a particularly fine horse, I think about it again." They reached Sloan as the town was coming to life, the main street already busy with wagons and riders. Harrison helped Helena down from the wagon and retrieved her bag from the back. She stood looking up at him, her eyes reflecting something that made his heart race. "Thank you for everything," she said. "Your kindness meant more to me than you know." Harrison wanted to ask her not to go, wanted to tell her that he felt something for her that defied all logic and reason, but he held his tongue. She had a position waiting for her, a chance at a new life, and he had no right to interfere with that. "If you ever need anything," he said instead, "the ranch is always there. You would be welcome." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I will remember that." He watched her walk away down the dusty street, her small bag clutched in her hand, and felt something precious slipping away. A man on horseback nearly ran into him, shouting an apology, and Harrison moved his wagon to the side of the street. But his eyes stayed on Helena's retreating form until she disappeared into one of the buildings. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than the journey in, and when Harrison arrived, the silence seemed to press down on him with physical weight. He threw himself into work, repairing fences and checking on the cattle that grazed in the near pastures, but nothing could shake the image of Helena from his mind. The sound of her voice singing to his horses, the way she had looked at him across the table with understanding in her eyes. 3 days passed, each one bleeding into the next in a haze of work and loneliness. Harrison's ranch hands returned from town, and the place became livelier with their presence, but their rough laughter and crude jokes only made him feel more isolated. On the 4th day, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, Harrison heard a sound that made him freeze in the barn where he was forking hay, singing. That same pure voice, rising clear and sweet through the evening air. He dropped the pitchfork and walked out to the corral, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Helena stood among the horses again, wearing a different dress this time, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days. She looked up as he approached, and he saw that she had been crying. "What happened?" he asked, crossing the distance between them in quick strides. "Did someone hurt you?" She shook her head, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "No, nothing like that. The position, it fell through." The family decided they wanted someone older, someone with more experience and references. They said they were sorry for the misunderstanding, but there was no position for me after all. Harrison felt a surge of anger at these people he had never met, followed immediately by something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. "What will you do?" "I do not know," Helena said, her voice breaking slightly. "I spent the last of my money on a room at the boarding house for 3 nights, thinking I would have wages coming in. Now, I have nowhere to go and no means to get there even if I did." He reached out without thinking and took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm that spoke of a life harder than her gentle manner suggested. "Stay here," he said. "I need help with the ranch. I cannot pay much, but I can offer room and board and honest work." She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "I cannot simply live here, Harrison. People would talk, and it would ruin both our reputations. A single man and a single woman living together unmarried, it would be a scandal." The solution came to him with a clarity that should have frightened him, but instead felt completely right. "Then marry me," he said. the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know we have only just met, and I know it sounds insane, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. These past few days without you here, the ranch has been like a tomb. When I heard your voice just now, it was like something in me that had died came back to life." Helena stared at him, tears streaming freely down her face now. "You do not have to save me," she whispered. "I am not your responsibility." "I am not trying to save you," Harrison said, pulling her closer. "I am trying to save myself. From a life of loneliness and silence and going through the motions without ever truly living. Your voice, Helena, it does not just calm the horses. It calms something in me that has been restless and hurting for as long as I can remember." She was quiet for a long moment, and Harrison held his breath, aware that he had just laid his heart bare in a way that left him completely vulnerable. Then she reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered skin. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who came through Sloan once a month. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church at the edge of town with only a handful of witnesses, mostly ranch hands who looked surprised but pleased at their boss's sudden marriage. Helena wore a dress borrowed from the general store owner's wife, a cream-colored silk that had been altered to fit her smaller frame, and Harrison wore his best suit, which still smelled faintly of the cedar chest where it had been stored for years. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Harrison he could kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that made Helena's eyes fill with tears. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and hope, and when they pulled apart, Harrison saw his own feelings reflected in her face. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, and Harrison carried Helena over the threshold in a gesture that made her laugh. The house had been cleaned from top to bottom, the work of his ranch hands who had thrown themselves into preparing a wedding gift for their employer. Fresh flowers sat in jars on the table, and someone had even hung curtains in the windows, cheerful yellow fabric that caught the last rays of sunlight. "It is beautiful," Helena said, looking around with wonder in her eyes. "It is home," Harrison replied, setting her down gently. "Our home now." That night, they came together with a sweetness that surprised them both. Harrison had known women before, encounters that had been brief and ultimately meaningless, but with Helena, everything was different. She trembled in his arms, and he realized with a shock that despite having been married before, she knew little of tenderness in the marriage bed. "Did he hurt you?" Harrison asked softly, holding her close. Helena nodded against his chest. "He was rough and cared only for his own pleasure. I learned to endure it, but I never understood why women spoke of enjoying such things." Harrison felt a fresh surge of anger at the man who had treated her so poorly, but he pushed it aside and focused on showing Helena what intimacy could be when it was rooted in care and respect. He took his time, learning the map of her body with gentle hands, paying attention to what made her sigh and what made her pull away. When they finally joined together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes, and afterward, Helena lay in his arms with a look of wonder on her face. "I did not know," she whispered. "I did not know it could be like that." Harrison kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "It will always be like that between us," he promised. "I will never hurt you, Helena. You have my word." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Harrison's life. Helena threw herself into making the ranch a true home, planting a garden behind the house and filling the rooms with small touches that made the place feel warm and lived in. She cooked meals that made the ranch hands groan with pleasure and beg for seconds, and she sang while she worked, her voice drifting through the house and across the yard like a blessing. But it was with the horses that Helena truly shined. She had a gift Harrison had never seen before, an ability to understand and communicate with the animals in ways that seemed almost magical. The black stallion that had been too dangerous to ride became gentle under her touch, and within a month, she was riding him bareback through the pastures, the two of them moving together as if they were one creature. "You should breed him," she told Harrison one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "He has good lines and intelligence. With the right mare, he could produce foals that would be worth a small fortune." Harrison had been thinking the same thing, but hearing Helena say it aloud made the idea feel real and possible. "I have been considering it," he admitted, "but it would mean changing the focus of the ranch, putting more money into horses than cattle. It is a risk." Helena reached over and took his hand. "All the best things in life are risks," she said with a smile. "Look at us. We married after knowing each other for less than a week. That was a tremendous risk, and look how well it has turned out." He laughed and pulled her close, kissing her soundly. "You make a good point, wife." They started small, purchasing 2 mares with good temperament and breeding them to the black stallion. Helena insisted on being present for every stage of the process, from the initial introduction to the births themselves. When the first foal arrived the following spring, a sturdy colt with his father's intelligence and his mother's calm disposition, Helena wept with joy as she held the newborn's head in her lap. "He is perfect," she whispered, stroking the foal's neck. "Harrison, he is absolutely perfect." Word spread quickly about the quality of the horses coming from the Zane ranch, and soon Harrison had buyers coming from as far away as Texas and Colorado. The money from the horse sales allowed them to expand the operation, purchasing more breeding stock and hiring additional hands who specialized in working with horses rather than cattle. Harrison slowly sold off most of his cattle, keeping only a small herd for their own use, and transformed the ranch into something he had only dreamed about. Through it all, Helena was his partner in every sense of the word. She had an eye for good horse flesh that rivaled his own, and her ability to calm even the most fractious animal made her invaluable in the training process. They worked side by side from sunrise to sunset, and at night they fell into bed exhausted but happy, their bodies fitting together with an ease that spoke of deep connection. 2 years after their marriage, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told Harrison one evening as they were brushing down the horses, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded. "The doctor in Sloan confirmed it yesterday. He says the baby should come in early December." Harrison set down the brush he had been holding and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," he said, the words still feeling new and precious even though he said them multiple times every day. "I love you so much, Helena." "I love you too," she whispered back. "I am a little frightened if I am being honest. My mother died in childbirth and I know how dangerous it can be." He pulled back to look at her face, seeing the worry in her eyes. "We will get through it together," he promised. "Whatever happens, we will face it together." The pregnancy was difficult. Helena suffered from terrible sickness in the early months that left her pale and weak, and as she grew larger, the New Mexico heat seemed to drain her energy. Harrison found himself taking on more of her usual tasks, trying to shield her from the hardest work while still respecting her fierce independence. The ranch hands rallied around her as well, treating her with a protective tenderness that would have been comical if it had not been so touching. In November, a cold snap swept through the region, bringing freezing temperatures and snow that was unusual for that time of year. Helena spent more time in the house, knitting small clothes for the coming baby and singing softly to herself. Harrison could not help but notice how her voice seemed even more beautiful now, richer somehow, as if pregnancy had added new depth to her already remarkable gift. The baby came on a cold December night during a fierce snowstorm. The doctor could not make it out from Sloan due to the weather, so it was just Harrison and Maria, the wife of one of his ranch hands who had experience as a midwife. The labor was long and brutal, and Harrison paced the main room of the house while Helena's screams tore through him like knife wounds. "Please," he prayed to a God he rarely spoke to. "Please do not take her from me. Take anything else but not her." Just before dawn, as the storm was finally beginning to clear, he heard a new sound join Helena's labored breathing. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. Maria appeared in the doorway, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "And your wife, she is tired but well. She is asking for you." Harrison rushed into the bedroom, his heart pounding. Helena lay propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale, but her eyes were bright as she looked down at the bundle in her arms. She looked up as Harrison approached, and her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Harrison sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that, while they would likely change color, were currently a deep blue. As Harrison watched, the infant's mouth opened in a yawn that showed pink gums. "He is perfect," Harrison breathed, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, just like his mother. They named him Henry, after Helena's father, and the boy grew strong and healthy through that winter and into the spring. Helena sang to him constantly, the same songs she had sung to the horses, and the baby would quiet instantly at the sound of her voice. Harrison would often find them in the rocking chair by the window, Helena nursing the baby while humming softly, and the sight would fill him with such intense love that he sometimes had to look away. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, it became clear that he had inherited his mother's gift with animals. By the time he was 3 years old, he could walk among the horses without fear, and they treated him with the same gentle care they showed Helena. Harrison watched his son carefully guide a mare and her foal from the pasture to the barn, talking to them in a steady stream of chatter, and felt his heart swell with pride. "He has your gift," he told Helena that evening as they sat on the porch, watching Henry play in the yard with a litter of barn kittens. "He has both of ours," she corrected, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Your patience and wisdom, my connection with the animals. He is the best of both of us." Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The horse breeding business continued to grow, and Harrison found himself turning away buyers because he could not keep up with the demand. He hired more hands and built additional stables, and the Zane Ranch became known throughout the territory as the place to get quality horses with exceptional temperaments. When Henry was 5, Helena became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in the summer of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Hannah. The little girl had her mother's dark hair and eyes, and from the moment she could make sounds, it was clear she had inherited Helena's singing voice. "Listen," Helena whispered to Harrison one afternoon when Hannah was just 6 months old. The baby was lying on a blanket in the shade, cooing and babbling to herself, and the sounds had a musical quality that made the horses in the nearby corral turn their heads toward her. "She is singing," Harrison said with wonder. "Already singing." As the children grew, the ranch house filled with laughter and music. Henry proved to be a natural horseman, and by the time he was 10, he could ride as well as any of the ranch hands. Hannah, meanwhile, showed little interest in riding but loved to sit in the barn and sing to the animals, her voice growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing year. Harrison and Helena watched their children grow with a contentment that neither had thought possible in their earlier lives. They still worked side by side every day, though the nature of their work had changed as the ranch grew, and they could afford to hire people to handle the more physically demanding tasks. They spent more time now on the business side of things, meeting with buyers and making decisions about breeding pairs and expansion plans. But every evening, without fail, they would walk out to the corral together and watch the horses as the sun set. Helena would often sing, her voice ringing clear and true across the desert landscape, and the horses would gather close to listen. Harrison would stand beside her, his arm around her waist, and think about how close he had come to missing all of this, how empty his life would have been if he had not ridden home that particular evening and heard her voice. One night when the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Harrison and Helena lay in bed together, their bodies entwined in the familiar way of long married couples. Helena traced patterns on his chest with her finger, her touch gentle and loving. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Marrying me so quickly, changing your whole life for someone you barely knew." Harrison caught her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her palm. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You gave me everything I did not even know I was missing. A real home, children, a purpose beyond just surviving. My only regret is that I did not find you sooner." She smiled and kissed him, a long, slow kiss that led to slow lovemaking, their bodies moving together with the practiced ease of years of intimacy. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Harrison thought about the scared, lonely woman who had been singing to his horses all those years ago, and the closed-off man he had been. They had saved each other, he realized, not in some grand, dramatic gesture, but in 1,000 small moments of kindness and understanding. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children and their business. Henry married at 22, bringing home a sweet-natured girl from Sloan named Sarah who quickly became part of the family. Hannah, who showed no interest in marriage, threw herself into the horse breeding business with a passion that surprised everyone. She had a knack for seeing potential in horses that others overlooked, and under her guidance, the ranch's reputation grew even stronger. When Harrison turned 55, he began to think about stepping back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. His body ached in ways it never had before, and he found himself tiring more easily. But more than that, he wanted time to simply enjoy life with Helena, to take long rides together and sit on the porch in the evenings without worrying about breeding schedules and buyer meetings. "I am thinking of turning the business over to Henry and Hannah," he told Helena one evening. "We have taught them everything we know. They are more than capable of running things." Helena looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "You are ready to rest," she said, not a question but a statement. "I am ready to focus on what matters most," he corrected, taking her hand. "Us, our family. I want to spend my remaining years enjoying the life we have built, not constantly working to build it bigger." They made the transition slowly, gradually giving Henry and Hannah more responsibility while Harrison and Helena took on advisory roles. It was strange at first, stepping back from something that had consumed so much of their energy for so many years, but it also felt right. Harrison found himself remembering the things he had loved to do before the ranch had demanded all his attention. Simple pleasures like fishing in the creek that ran through the back pasture and reading books in the afternoon. But his favorite times were still the evenings in the corral, watching Helena sing to the horses. Her voice had changed over the years, losing some of its youthful purity but gaining depth and richness. And the horses responded to her as they always had, gathering close and standing quiet as if they understood they were in the presence of something special. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Harrison arranged a surprise for Helena. With Henry and Hannah's help, he organized a gathering of everyone whose lives had been touched by their ranch. Buyers came from across the territory, bringing horses they had purchased over the years, descendants of that first black stallion and the mares Helena had chosen so carefully. The ranch was filled with people and animals, all there to celebrate the woman who had started it all with her gift for understanding what others could not hear. When Helena walked out of the house and saw the crowd gathered in the yard, she stopped and pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Harrison came to her side and took her hand, leading her out among the guests. "They are all here because of you," he said softly. "Because of your gift and your kindness and the love you have shown to every creature on this ranch." One by one, people came forward to tell Helena what her horses had meant to them. A young man who had been paralyzed by fear after a bad riding accident, healed by the gentleness of a mare Helena had trained. A woman who had found companionship and purpose in breeding horses after losing her husband. A child who had learned confidence and courage from a gelding with infinite patience. Through it all, Helena stood with her hand in Harrison's, listening and crying and laughing. When the last person had spoken, she looked out at the assembled crowd and began to sing. It was a song of gratitude and joy, wordless but full of emotion. And as her voice rose into the New Mexico sky, every horse on the ranch lifted its head to listen. Harrison watched his wife with a love so deep it felt like it might crack his chest open. She was older now, her dark hair threaded with silver, and her face marked by the lines of a life well lived. But to him, she would always be the woman he had found singing to his horses in the twilight, the woman whose voice had called to something in him that had been silent for too long. That night, after the guests had left and the ranch was quiet again, they lay in bed together and talked about the life they had built. "Do you remember that first night?" Helena asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "When you found me in the corral and I was so frightened and lost. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Harrison said. "And I remember knowing, even then, that you were going to change my life. I was terrified when you proposed," she admitted. "Not of you, but of making another mistake, of ending up trapped again. But you never made me feel trapped, Harrison. You made me feel free." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair that after all these years was as familiar to him as his own skin. "You freed me too," he said, "from a life that was not really living, just existing. You taught me what it meant to truly be alive." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, their bodies knowing each other so well that words were unnecessary. Afterward, as Helena drifted off to sleep in his arms, Harrison lay awake listening to her breathing and thinking about the incredible gift of their life together. The years that followed were peaceful. Henry and Sarah had 3 children of their own, and the ranch house was often filled with the sound of grandchildren playing and learning to ride. Hannah never married but seemed content with her life, dividing her time between the horses and helping to raise her nieces and nephews. Harrison and Helena settled into the role of grandparents with joy, passing on their knowledge and their stories to a new generation. When Harrison was 68, he suffered a mild heart attack that left him weakened but alive. The doctor ordered him to rest and avoid any strenuous activity, and for the first time in his life, Harrison found himself truly idle. It frustrated him at first, but Helena was patient, sitting with him on the porch and reading aloud or simply holding his hand while they watched the ranch carry on without them. "I am not ready to leave you," he told her one afternoon, voicing the fear that had been growing in his mind since the heart attack. "There is still so much I want to do with you." Helena squeezed his hand, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then do not leave," she said simply. "Stay with me." "We still have time, Harrison. We still have time." He recovered slowly, learning to accept the limitations of his aging body while still finding joy in the smaller moments. He could no longer ride for hours or work with the horses physically, but he could still sit in the corral and watch, still offer advice to Henry and Hannah when they asked for it. And every evening, he could still stand beside Helena and listen to her sing, her voice as powerful and moving as it had been the first time he heard it. On a warm evening in late summer, when Harrison was 73 and Helena was 70, they walked out to the corral together as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the horses gathered close as Helena began to sing. It was a song Harrison did not recognize, something new she had been composing in her head over the past weeks, and it spoke of love and loss and the beauty of a life shared. Harrison stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and felt a profound sense of peace. He had lived a good life, a life full of love and purpose and meaning. He had married a woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. Their children were happy and successful, carrying on the work they had started. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, a testament to what could be created when two people found each other at exactly the right moment. When Helena finished her song, the horses stood quiet for a long moment, as if paying their respects. Then the black stallion, now ancient and gray around the muzzle but still proud, walked up to Helena and pressed his forehead against her chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered something Harrison could not hear, and the horse blew out a soft breath of acknowledgement. "I love you," Harrison said, "not for the first time and certainly not for the last. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Helena turned to him, her face soft with emotion in the fading light. "And I love you," she replied. "You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. You showed me that love could be gentle and kind, that it could heal instead of hurt. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Harrison Zane." They kissed there in the corral, surrounded by horses and the life they had built together. And Harrison thought about the young cowboy he had been, riding home tired and lonely, never imagining that his life was about to change forever. That man would never have believed that such happiness was possible, that a woman singing to horses in the twilight could become his whole world. But it had happened, and it was real, and it was theirs. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Harrison and Helena walked back to the house hand in hand, ready for whatever time they had left together. Behind them, the horses settled down for the night, calm and content, still touched by the magic of Helena's voice and the love that had transformed a lonely ranch into a home. The seasons turned as they always did, bringing the cycle of birth and death and renewal that marked life on the ranch. Harrison and Helena grew older, their steps slower and their bodies more fragile, but their love remained constant. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a sprawling family tree that had grown from two lonely people who found each other in the New Mexico twilight. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Helena beside him holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," whispered with his final breath, and Helena kissed his forehead and told him she loved him too, would always love him. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Harrison's kindness and integrity, and the horses on the ranch seemed to mourn, standing quiet and still in the corrals as if they understood that something precious had been lost. Helena lived for 5 more years after Harrison's death, surrounded by family but always carrying the ache of his absence. She still went to the corral every evening and sang to the horses, though her voice was thinner now, worn by age and grief. But the horses still came to her, still pressed close to feel her touch, still listened with that same focused attention they had always shown. On a spring evening when the desert was blooming with wildflowers and the air smelled of sage and possibility, Helena walked out to the corral one last time. She sang a song about love and reunion, about souls finding each other across the barriers of death, and as her voice faded into the twilight, she closed her eyes and smiled. The horses gathered around her as she sank to the ground, their presence a comfort in her final moments. They found her there at dawn, surrounded by horses and wearing the same peaceful smile, gone to join the man who had loved her with his whole heart. They buried her beside Harrison on the hill overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together beneath the vast New Mexico sky they had both loved. On the simple headstone, their children had inscribed the words that best summed up their life together. 2 souls who found each other in song and built a life in love. The ranch continued to thrive under Henry and Hannah's guidance, and then under their children and their children's children. The horses bred there maintained their reputation for intelligence and gentle temperament, and people would sometimes remark that there was something special about animals raised on the Zane ranch, something peaceful and calm that set them apart. Some said it was the quality of the breeding program or the skill of the trainers, but those who had known Helena would smile and say it was simpler than that. The horses still remembered her voice, they would explain, and that memory lived on in every generation. They remembered the woman who had sung to them with such love and understanding, and they passed that memory down through their bloodlines like a precious gift. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the desert, people working in the barns would sometimes swear they could hear it, a woman's voice singing softly to the horses, calming their spirits and reminding them that they were loved. Whether it was memory or imagination or something more, no one could say for certain. But the horses always seemed to know, and they would lift their heads and listen, their eyes soft and their bodies still, as if acknowledging the presence of something holy. The story of Harrison and Helena became part of the ranch's history, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about taking chances and following your heart, about the transformative power of love and the importance of recognizing magic when it appears in your life. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop and listen, to really hear what the world and the people around you are trying to tell you. Their great-great-grandchildren, who never knew them but grew up hearing the stories, would walk through the ranch and feel the echo of that love in every corner. It was in the sturdy buildings Harrison had built with his own hands, in the carefully tended pastures where Helena had chosen the perfect breeding pairs, in the patient way the horses responded to gentle handling. It was a legacy that went beyond business success or material wealth. It was a legacy of love and partnership, and the beautiful life that can be built when 2 people commit to growing together. And so the ranch endured, generation after generation, a testament to a lonely cowboy who rode home one evening and found a woman singing to his horses, a woman whose voice calmed his restless soul and showed him what it meant to truly live. Their love story became legend, the kind of romance that people yearned for, proof that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, with all its hardships and dangers, it was possible to find a love so deep and true that it transcended death itself, and lived on in the land and the animals, and the hearts of those who came after. The legacy of Harrison and Helena Zane was not measured in acres or profits or number of horses sold, though by all those metrics they had been extraordinarily successful. Their true legacy was the proof that love, real love built on respect and understanding and partnership, could transform not just two lives but countless others. Every person who bought a horse from their ranch and found a faithful companion, every child who learned confidence and courage from one of their gentle-natured animals, every couple who visited the ranch and saw what a true partnership looked like, they all carried forward the impact of that one magical evening when a lonely man heard a voice that called to his soul. As the 20th century arrived and the Wild West faded into history, the Zane Ranch adapted and survived, holding on to the principles its founders had established while embracing necessary changes. The name became synonymous with quality and integrity, and visitors to the ranch would often ask to see the graves on the hill, to pay their respects to the remarkable couple who had started it all. Standing at those graves, looking out over the land they had loved and nurtured, it was easy to imagine them as they had been. Young and full of hope, scared and brave in equal measure, finding each other at exactly the moment when they both needed saving. It was easy to hear, in the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant sound of horses moving through the pastures, an echo of Helena's voice singing its wordless song of love and peace. And perhaps, in the ways that truly matter, they were still there. Still walking hand in hand through the corrals at sunset, still singing to the horses and watching their family grow, still building the legacy of love that would outlast stone and steel and time itself. Their story had become something larger than just their individual lives. It had become a reminder of what is possible when you open your heart to the magic that exists in everyday moments, when you have the courage to take a chance on love, even when it seems improbable or illogical. The lonely cowboy and the woman with the voice that calmed his soul had found each other across the distances of loss and pain and loneliness, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. Their love had healed them both, given them purpose and joy, and rippled out to touch countless lives. It was a love story for the ages, simple in its beginnings but infinite in its impact, a testament to the transformative power of finding your true match and having the courage to hold on with both hands and never let go. As the sun set on the ranch that still bore their name, as it had set thousands of times before and would thousands of times again, the horses gathered in the corrals as they always did. They stood quiet and peaceful, their eyes gentle and their spirits calm, living proof of the legacy Helena and Harrison had built together. And if you listened carefully, beneath the wind and the rustle of hay and the soft sounds of horses settling for the night, you might hear it still. A voice singing, pure and true, a song of love that would never end.